that way he'll have enough money to take care of himself and our boys. The youngest of him at the time was a junior in high school, was extremely bright, and we promised him he'd be able to go to college. And so in my mind, that was the only solution in my mind that was going to be able to work to take care of, himself and our boys. Now, obviously, someone in their right mind does not think that way, but that's what was going through my head. And as a believer, that only compounded the problem and made things worse because I could not figure out where God was in this process. Nights were the worst times at all because I couldn't sleep at all. And so I'd sit there with my Bible in my hand and I would literally cry out to God. And I would try and read the word that for years had been a source of comfort and encouragement to me and inspiration. And I would sit there and I would read it. And it's like the words were just bouncing off the page and nothing was penetrating, nothing was sinking in. And I kept thinking to myself, if I have the Holy Spirit living inside of me, and the joy of the Lord is my strength, then how can I possibly be depressed? It just did not make any sense to me. I could not reconcile that. And the reason it didn't make any sense to me is that I wasn't just dealing with a normal depression. I would come to find out 3 years later that I was actually dealing with the depressive side of a bipolar disorder that took 3 years to properly diagnose. This was not a spiritual or a moral issue that I was dealing with, but a medical one. There was no amount of positive thinking or pulling myself up by my own bootstraps that was going to change my situation. I had a disease that was affecting an organ in my body, no different than someone who was diagnosed with diabetes or cancer, except my organ happened to be my brain, and my diagnosis came with a whole lot of stigma attached to it. So I don't have time to give you all the details, but over the course of those two months that I was talking to you about, I made 2 different suicide attempts, and the second one landed me in a psychiatric hospital for 5 days. I never, in my wildest imagination, thought that I would end up in a psychiatric hospital. Up until that time, I had been a straight-A student all through my entire life. I had been the person who held our entire family together. I had run a small business from my home for like 15 years. I was the person who volunteered in our son's classrooms. I volunteered at our church and in our community. I had been a pastor's wife for the first 8 years of our marriage, and here I was locked up in a psychiatric hospital. My husband, who at that time was not actually my husband because we were actually divorced, while we were waiting at our local hospital for me to be transported to a psychiatric hospital, he went home and he had gotten my favorite UCLA sweat jacket for me to wear because I was absolutely freezing in this hospital. Now, living in the Southern California desert for the past 21 years like we have, you can put me in 110, 115 degrees. I have no problem. In fact, this last Monday, we topped out at 124 degrees. But you put me in 70 degrees, and I am absolutely freezing. I don't do well. And so this sweat jacket became a source of great comfort to me while I was in the hospital. But it's funny the things that you don't really realize are important until they actually are. The people at the psychiatric hospital let me keep this jacket with me because we weren't allowed to wear the clothes that we came in with. We had to put on these hospital-type scrubs that weren't anything as nice as a doctor or a nurse would wear. They were like paper thin. But because I didn't have the string that would normally go, like in the sweat jacket, they let me keep it because I couldn't use it to potentially harm myself with. And it's funny because I have no recollection as to why or when I happened to take this out, but because it wasn't there, they let me keep this jacket. And it became a great source of comfort to me while I was there, and also kept me, it was miserably cold inside of this psych ward, but I was able to keep it. So after 5 days, they let me go, diagnosing me at that time just with severe depression. We still didn't know that I had bipolar disorder at that time. And they required me to see a psychiatrist and a therapist because now I was on medication that obviously had to be monitored by a psychiatrist. But this jacket that was once a source of comfort to me as I left that hospital now seemed like it just, had this big scarlet letter of shame on it as I walked out of that psychiatric hospital. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. Matthew West has a song called Hello, My Name Is. And he talks about names that the enemy whispers into our ears or sometimes shouts. Names that maybe could go back all the way to your childhood, or maybe they're more recent. And he starts out the song where he says, "Hello, my name is Regret." And boy, I sure felt regret as I was leaving that hospital. And he talks about several other names. Another name that he talks about that certainly fit the bill as I left was shame. And another name that I felt as I left that hospital was defeat. And I felt unworthy as I left there. And I felt confused. These are all names, as I talked about, like, felt like I had this big scarlet letter as I was walking out of the hospital. And I certainly still felt depressed. I was getting less depressed than when I went in there. And I also felt broken. And I thought to myself, how in the world is that God ever going to use someone as broken as me ever again in my entire life? How is he ever going to use someone like me? And this is how I saw myself every day. As I looked in the mirror, this is what I saw. And it went on like this for quite a long time. And there may be some of you that feel the same way as you look in the mirror. And maybe your names are the same, or maybe yours are a little bit different. But a little by little, as time went on, I started to get back on my feet, and I was seeing a therapist individually. And Adam and I were continuing to see a marriage counselor as we were still in our reconciliation process, trying to find our way back to each other. And one day, as we were in our counselor's office, he looked at me, and he could see the anxiety that I was dealing with, and he could see all these things that I was grappling with. And he said to me, he goes, "You know, Annette, it's like you're holding yourself in this prison cell." He goes, "But the door is wide open." He goes, "And Jesus is standing right outside the cell, and he's got his arm right there waiting to help you out." He goes, "But you've got to cross out, step out of that cell and reach his hand and walk out of that cell." He goes, "He's waiting right there with his arm ready to help you out, but you've got to step out of that cell that you're helping yourself in." And I thought to myself, how could God forgive me for trying to take my own life, even though I knew I wasn't in my right mind at the time that happened? Then finally, about a year later, after grappling with all of this, I finally had a breakthrough. And it actually came during a manic period that we didn't even realize at the time that I was experiencing a manic episode. We wouldn't figure all of this out till several months later down the road. And one of the things about the manic side of bipolar disorder is that all of your senses are heightened when you're in a manic side of bipolar disorder. So your sense of taste, and your sense of touch, and your sense of smell. And so you can imagine, if your sense of touch is heightened, then your physical instinct goes through the roof. And so you can look this up. It's one of the side effects of bipolar disorder is an increased sexual activity that people have. So for my husband and I, this was a great thing because we were remarried by this time. And so my husband was a very happy camper. And so it's okay that I tell you all this because he's given me full disclosure. And besides, this is already in the book already, so it's already out there. So it's okay that I tell you this. So anyhow, back to this breakthrough. So on this one particular morning, after we experienced this off-the-charts time of physical intimacy, I started crying. And I don't mean just like I have a few tears running down my cheeks. I start crying like heaving, sobbing from down in your gut. Like I've never cried before. I'm talking like the ugly kind of crying, ladies, like what I'm talking about, the ugly crying that we can do. And my husband at first starts trying to ask me, "Are you okay? Did I do something wrong?" And of course you can't talk when you're crying like this. At one point I tried to tell him, "You can't talk." And so he just did what he does best. He just sat there and held me for, I'm not exaggerating, it must have been 20 minutes that I sobbed, cried until I could not cry any longer. And then at one point, you know, when you get that way, then you start doing the, and then you start trying to calm down. And then he goes, "Take a deep breath," and I take a deep breath and calm down. And then finally, after a period of about 30 minutes, where I finally got completely calmed down, my dear sweet husband just says to me, "Okay, so you want to tell me what that was all about?" So I said to him, I just had two overwhelmingly different feelings right on top of each other. I said, I was just so incredibly thankful that you and I had found our way back to each other, and we were able to experience marriage now the way it always dreamed that it should be, and that we were more in love with each other now than we were when we first got married. And I was so appreciative of it because I realized all that it took to get here, and I was just so incredibly thankful. And yet the minute that thought finished going through my head, I became so incredibly remorseful because I realized I almost didn't live to see this day because I tried to take my own life, and I became so sad. And at that very moment, God met me right here in our bedroom, and he said to me, Annette, I already forgave you for that. Please let that go. And I became so overwhelmed by God's grace and his forgiveness and his unconditional love that all I could do was weep. And so that's what I did for 20 minutes. And I don't know if you know that song by David Crowder called Oh How He Loves. And there's a great line in there that says, and we are his portion and he is our prize, drawn to redemption by the grace in his eyes. His grace is an ocean, we're all sinking. And I don't know if you've ever been so overwhelmed by God's grace that you just feel like you're sinking in it. Not drowning, but just sinking in God's grace. And that's how I felt that morning. And then I realized that I could finally take off this scarlet letter jacket that I've been walking around with for at least a year. And I could finally put on the garment